Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I have special guests. John Dayton is joining me once again, and along with him is director Ralph Senensky. You've heard me talk about Ralph any number of times. He directed about 14 episodes of the Waltons, including the two-part episode The Conflict and the two-part episode The Grandchild. Along with that, he directed all sorts of episodes of shows during the 60s, 70s, 80s. He directed 7 episodes of The Partridge Family, 6 episodes of Nanny and the Professor, 9 episodes of The Courtship of Eddie's Father, 7 episodes of the original Star Trek series, a couple episodes of Wild Wild West, a show I always enjoyed watching, 4 of The Fugitive, 5 Dr. Kildare, some Route 66, even a Twilight Zone episode, and Mission Impossible. So that's just an overview of his long career. So I'm very happy to have Ralph join me and John Dayton. I just recently talked about The Warrior, which Ralph directed. So please welcome Ralph Senensky and John Dayton.
I listened to the two of you this morning, and John, when you were talking about the gift and my asking to go to Franklin Canyon for a day, and you said they gave me permission. What you left out was I gave up a half a day in order to get it.
Oh,
So I shot the show was filmed in 6 days rather than the usual six and a half.
Didn't you say you also did the same thing on The Conflict to be able to go to Frazier Park?
That was less by far. To begin with, the 2 hour with the 6.5 day per hour should have been 13 days. After there were 2 weeks at the end of the second week, after the end of 12 days, there was the threat of a writer's strike. And so we scheduled it to do it, and we're scheduled to do it in 12 days, except the show filming ahead of me was behind, so I didn't start till noon. So The Conflict was filmed in 11 and a half days.
That's
I know.
remarkable.
yeah. And we went up to Frazier Park for just one day for
the pony cart.
But the pony cart, that was it.
Yeah, but this one we went up there for 6 days.
Mm-hmm. How do you remember that, Ralph?
I don't know.
Did you keep a journal while during your years? No, just all.
Unfortunately,
wow.
No.
All right, you have raised the bar so high now. All the viewers are going to expect me to remember every detail of the 200 plus episodes that I was in. And I am going to fail miserably by comparison.
But you did over 200. I only did 190.
Oh, okay. So I get grace on the last 25 or so.
John, you're looking good. Judy, you're looking good.
As are you. Yeah.
You're looking fantastic.
I'm going to take those off.
Well, you're just a little miracle. You really, truly are to me. And you are my inspiration, Ralph. I can't begin to tell you how a young guy, new to the business, basically, I had the wonderful experience of, I looked at our shows that we did, and I count, you directed 15. Is that right?
12. Two of them were 2 hour.
Yeah, okay. I worked on every single one of those with you, except for The Conflict. So you became my inspiration, Ralph. And you were such a dear friend to me. And I got to be careful. I get really emotional, but.
Oh, that's all right. As long as you do it, I don't.
But I wonder, Judy, if we could just go back to August of '73 to The Chicken Thief, which was, Ralph, I think that was your first show, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
So how did you come to initially be hired to direct The Chicken Thief? Did you have a history with anyone connected with the show already?
The agents were, and I was happy to get there. And once I got there, I learned very early on what a great place it was, because the opening scene of The Chicken Thief was John Boy comes into Ike's store and he stops just in the store because Ike is waiting on a customer, and John Boy was just looking at him. And the customer left and he was on looking at him. And John Boy comes over to Ike and tells him how he really hasn't paid attention, what a remarkable man he is. And so Ike says, well, do you want to hear more? And of course, John Boy makes an excuse and says, no. I went to Earl and said, Earl, that's a lovely scene, but there's no closure. And he went home and wrote, and the next day he came in and had another scene for later where John Boy comes in and Ike gets all excited. He's on the other side of the store. He comes running around and goes back, brings out a big box of stuff, baby pictures, all of the stuff for John Boy to have. Then he says, what are you going to write about me? It was a charming scene. And I loved the fact that Earl was so responsive to a suggestion. I knew there was a place that I was going to be happy working.
Could we just talk about that just a little bit more? Because a lot of fans ask about rewrites and, who did them and why, and how involved was the director with, for example, like you suggesting something be changed. Did that work out well the whole time you were on the series?
Oh, yes. Yes. Especially on the conflict, on the warrior.
Oh, yes, I remember the warrior.
Oh, yes.
I just did a segment about the warrior, so that will be on just shortly before we have this conversation. So this will be a nice follow-up to that segment where I shared different excerpts of things you said about shooting that, and we all remember that one.
We all remember that one.
Oh, there was a lot of.
I wasn't in it, but I remember being around a little bit.
There was more that happened behind the camera than in front of it.
Yeah, wasn't that Edward Franz and Victor Jory that you wanted?
Well, Edward Franz was signed.
Oh,
he was signed, and I had worked with Edward, and then afterward, I had to go tell him that you're not going to be able to do it. And I mentioned Victor Jory because Victor Jory has Indian ancestors to make him eligible, but he wasn't available. Edward Franz had played Indian, brilliant actor. And I always envisioned that as a male Indian parallel to the pony cart. It was that good because Earl wrote that full script. The original script was by some relative, either probably of the Adelson family. One of the women in the family wrote it. A great idea, just a dreadful script. And Earl and I went over to his house, and I think we worked for about 5 days. He did the writing, and then we sat and we talked and just worked our way through it. And it's a lovely script.
Who took the credit for that?
It wasn't Earl.
No, it wasn't Earl. I'm sure Earl would do that as with so many writers. Gene Coon did that. Would rewrite, but would not take the credit.
Yep. I remember saying to you, who's Victor Jory? And you said he was the carpetbagger in Gone with the Wind, right?
Yes. And I worked with Victor later on Young Maverick. He's a wonderful actor.
The gentleman who played the Indian, now I don't remember his.
Gerardo.
Okay. But I do remember this, Ralph. I do remember stumbling over lines and not being able to remember lines. And I remember you a dual thing. You were trying to coax a performance out of an actor who couldn't remember his lines.
Didn't you end up using cue cards? Because I seem to remember being on the set at one point and it was on the sound stage, and I don't know, maybe I'm just imagining it.
There weren't cue cards, but there were two cameras for everything he filmed. So I shot the longest, either the over shoulder or the two shot and his close up all at once. And poor Marge Fowler, who edited it. I mean, I would go through it with my script, and as he said a line, and if he said something that didn't work, then I would make a mark. Sometimes I would have 7, 8 takes on 2 cameras.
I remember.
Did you know in advance you were going to have 2 cameras, or was that something that was a scramble once you realized how difficult it was going to be?
Oh, I used 2 cameras a lot when needed, but not under those kind of conditions.
So did you, at the beginning of the episode before you started filming, already request?
Right. The minute I knew that I'd lost the battle,
I remember ordering those cameras. So I also remember the drama with Ralph Waite and Will. And I remember sitting in Will's trailer with Ralph and them explaining to me, boy, they were stubborn, weren't they, Ralph?
I must tell you a funny story. Later, Ralph was going to be directing a movie for television, and Ralph Farren, our wonderful assistant director, was going to be his assistant director, and he was casting not casting the people that you would normally cast. And Ralph Farren did say to him, "Aren't you going to use real Indians this time?"
Well, Farron was such a gentleman and such a dear.
Oh, he was wonderful. He, Harvey, Walter, they were great. That whole company was great, just great.
Well, was it going back to the chicken thief for a moment? Because I read something, I think, in your blog, and I would think it would be the chicken thief. There was just such a sweet story about, you said something about it was a lunchtime, and instead of spending your time planning your afternoon, you spent the time trying to memorize all the children's names.
Yeah, because I started at noon because of the half day thing. And so my half day was going to be an afternoon. And I did spend the morning just trying to I knew Richard because I'd worked with him, but the other 6 and the Mary Ellen, and I mean your name and Aaron's, Mary McDonough's name, they had the flummox more than the boys did.
Well, because we had Ellen Corby and we had Mary Ellen, and then we had Mary McDonough, and
yes. Yeah, Mary McDonough and Mary Ellen and Ellen Corby. And while we're on Ellen, I just recently saw again, and I hadn't seen it in years, I Remember Mama. And Ellen's performance just blew me away.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
yes.
Well, and the movie itself did. And I had avoided it because I just looked at it and I thought, I don't see that. Dynamite. All the performances, Irene Dunn, Barbara Bel Geddes. But Ellen, and then I've read since then, Ellen, who had moved from script girl into smaller roles, and then when she got this role, and she was Oscar nominated for it, didn't win, and then never had another big role in movies until Grandma Walton.
When you talked about having requested Edward Franz, it raised the question for me about Beulah Bondi. How did she come to be playing Martha Corinne? I
asked for her.
Okay.
And I hadn't met Beulah. In 1957, I directed a play at Horseshoe Theater on Melrose of The Immoralist and cast Rachel Ames. She was the daughter of Dorothy Adams and Byron Folger, two stalwart names of character actors. And she played the lead. Well, her mother, Doro, brought Beulah to see the performance, but I didn't get to meet Beulah. And afterward, I asked Doral, I said, would it be possible for me to telephone Miss Bondi? And she checked and she said yes. And she gave me her number. And I called Beulah. So we had this conversation in 1957. And the one thing I remember that she told me, true acting is being, not seeming.
Wow. Wow.
It says, says so much in so few words. I had no other contact with her until 1974. No, I think 73 was when I did the Chicken Thief, and 74 would have been the conflict, the third season, and that was going to be the 2-season opener. But I don't know why, of all the movies that I'd seen of Beulah, I just remember Trail of the Lonesome Pine, which was 1936, the first color movie ever shot on location, with Sylvia Sidney, Fred MacMurray, and Henry Fonda. And she played a mountain woman. She played Henry Fonda's mother. And I said, I want Beulah Bondi. And nobody disagreed. They called her and they got her.
Wow.
You know what was funny? I remember the kids. It was the buzz was, who's Beulah Bondi?
I know.
Even me, I didn't know who, we didn't have the access to VCRs or old movies. We just didn't know who she was.
But while we're talking about her, because of course, I knew Beulah from then until she died in the early 90s. And the great stories she told me. May I tell them now?
Yes, please.
She told me about the biggest disappointment in her life. She had come to Hollywood when they did Street Scene, which was an Elma Rice play that she had appeared in on Broadway. She was one of the few people, there might have been somebody else, that was brought out to do the Sam Goldwyn film of it, and had been in Hollywood ever since. By 1938, 39, but she already had 2 Oscar nominations. And of course, she didn't audition. She didn't screen test. That people wanted Beulah. They called and asked for her, and she either accepted or didn't. Well, she said she had a phone call from John Ford, probably somebody calling for him, asking if she would come and test for Grapes of Wrath for Macho. Have I told you this story, John?
No.
Oh, it's a great story. Now, Beulah didn't test. And so this was a special request. And they did say 2 things. Number one, John Ford will direct the test, and you will be you're the only one who's going to be testing. And of course, Ma Joad was such a great role. And so Beulah accepted. Beulah then went into her wardrobe, got out the oldest clothes she could find. She said she went into her backyard and got dirt under her fingernails, and then got a friend, and they went up north, and they went to 2 or 3 Okie camps. And she did that for a couple of days, talking to the people. And at one point I did ask her, I said, Beulah, by that point, you were a fairly well-known person. Were you ever recognized? And she said, just once. And I said, what did you do? She said, I left. So she came back, and then she was ready, and she reported to the studio, and they filmed. And they filmed the test. And she filmed it they had 2 or 3 scenes. Mr. Ford directed them. There was a contract actor who played the scenes with her. And when they finished, they thanked her. And as they were leaving, the actor that she had done the test with came and to say goodbye to her, thanked her for it, told her what a pleasure it had been working with her. And he felt she was the best of all of the actresses who had tested for it. And she knew then that she wasn't going to play Ma Joad.
Wow.
she told me she felt that by then she knew that it was going to be Jane Darwell, and she felt that it was because Miss Darwell was a contract player. I've read a biography of Ford since, and I think there was something else. I do think that John Ford wanted her, but Darryl Zanuck wanted Jane Darwell because he wanted Ma Joe to be a Mother Earth figure. And unfortunately, the Mother Earth figure, Ma Joe should have been scrawny and thin. And I personally think that Grapes of Wrath is a great film. It would have been an impossibly magnificent film if Beulah had played. And there would have been a part to it that isn't necessarily there now. It's a great film, but it's really kind of an ugly film and a downer. And there would have been a humanity with Beulah playing Ma Joe.
And how did Beulah take that?
You just take it, and then she said it was the biggest disappointment in her career.
Oh,
Wow.
And then I have another one. This was later. I mean, she was cast in the Snake Pit with the Olivia de Havilland film, and she was playing one of the crazy ladies in the insane asylum. She had 2 scenes with de Havilland, and because she only had the 2 scenes, and the film had been in production and filming for some time, so all actresses don't start on the first day. So by the time she got to it, they had been shooting for a while, and there were a lot of actresses that she knew, and they all told her, Beulah, prepare yourself. Totally Anatole Litvak, the director, he's impossible. We don't know what's happened to him, but he just is impossible. We can't be pleased. And Beulah said she had worked with Tolley on The Sisters at Warner Brothers with Betty Davis. And they said, well, wait, you'll see. So came the day Beulah was to do the bigger of the 2 scenes that she did with Olivia. And they got it set up, and they were ready, and they said, let's film it. And Beulah had most of the lines. Olivia was seated, Beulah was standing, and Beulah had, it was Beulah's scene. And she did it, and got to the end, and Mr. Litvak said, cut, once again, please. And Beulah looked over the ladies, the other ladies in the scene, on the sidelines, and they're going, you see. So she did it again, cut, let's do it again, please. 6 times.
Oh, God.
Before he said, cut, print. So she went up to him afterwards and said, Tolley, can I ask you a question? He said, of course, Beulah, what? She said, well, what was wrong with those first 5 takes? And he said, nothing. I just like watching you act. And something, and I remembered that as we were shooting, the 2 I filmed with her, and she was a joy to watch act.
Yes, and I can bear witness to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely sure. Ralph, did Beulah win the Emmy for the Pony Cart?
Beulah did, but I own it. Her niece,
Okay.
that Mary Jackson suggestion, gave it to me, and it is going to the museum when I go to sit on the pony cart.
Oh, wow.
Weren't you going to take her to the Emmy Awards?
I should ask me to, but I was scheduled to go to Hawaii to film. I think it was Hawaii, I'm not sure which one. But it was at the same time that I was doing a major revamping, adding a 3rd floor to my house, and I was afraid to leave it, so I had to say no, and then I ended up not going to Hawaii because of the house, and it was lucky because when it was finished, and I was showing somebody in it, and they said I smell gas. There was a leak in the fireplace up there, so if I had been gone.
I think you called me and said, "Would you like to take her?" To, and
I don't remember that, but it's
and I
very
could,
possible.
yeah. Well, I hope it was.
If you and I agree that I called you, I called you. If you want that, I called you. I can lie too.
If we could talk about Beulah a little bit more. I remember in the Pony Cart Ralph, the final scene where Ed Graves had done this beautiful field of flowers. And I was next to you when she hit the ground. I remember going, oh, it was such a spectacular ending.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
That was Ben.
And then she was bent over, and then as she comes up from behind the flowers, looking up with that great look on her face. And then in the editing room, I had done a shot starting up in the trees, coming down to establish the shot when John Boy and Martha Corinne arrived, and they used that shot in reverse to end the show when it went back up. It was just
the sun.
Yeah, it was they just the editing room took the shot and added that. So she's looking up, and then that shot took them up to the heavens.
Thank you very much to Ralph and John for joining me for this first part of our conversation. I'll be back with more of our conversation, more behind the scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.